Welcome to the Bowers Museum. It's great to see everyone here on this wonderful, warm, sunny Sunday afternoon in June. My name is Emily Mahon, and I serve the Bowers Museum as Senior Director of Education. And when we were putting together the programming for this exhibit, we were so excited to run across these two wonderful people behind me. And today, we celebrate the Acjachemen, first people of the South Orange County coast. Our presenters today are Alfred Cruz Jr. and Patricia Martz. Alfred Cruz Jr. is a board member of the California Cultural Resources Preservation Alliances. He was a major driving force of the Bolsa Chia Land Trust Habitat Restoration Project. This project aimed to restore 120 acres of native habitat. A Waneno Acjachemen descendant. Dr. Martz's fields of expertise are prehistoric archaeology, California Native Americans, and cultural resource management. She has conducted archaeological investigations on San Nicolas Island for the past 12 years. She is familiar with state and federal laws and regulations regarding the protection of historic and archaeological properties and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. She is an advocate for the protection and preservation of archaeological sites. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Martz and Alfred Cruz Jr.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon. My name is Alfred Cruz Jr. Welcome to the lecture about the people, the Acjachemen. I am of Acjachemen ancestry. We were named Guareño after the San Juan Capistrano mission, but Acjachemen is a tribal name that we call ourselves. If you understand the terminology, Guareño comes from San Juan Capistrano. I mean, it's a Spanish terminology. Okay, I am a member of the Guareño Band of Mission Indians, the Acjachemen Nation, and the United Coalition to Protect Panhe, a group of Acjachemen people dedicated to protecting the sacred site situated at Camp Pendleton, a military installation. I'm a peon player. Peon is a traditional game played by many Southern California and Colorado River tribes. We will explain and demonstrate later. I also support my brother-in-law, who's at Steve Cassiosi, when he goes to sing traditional funeral songs. I also serve on the board of the California Cultural Resources Preservation Alliance. And right now I'd like to introduce Pat Martz.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to hear our talk. My name is Patricia Martz. I'm Professor Emerita of Anthropology at California State University, Los Angeles, and President of the California Cultural Resource Preservation Alliance, or CCRPA, is our acronym. The lady in the photo in our brochure is Lillian Robles, and she and I co-founded the Alliance in 1998 in response to the destruction of a 9,000-year-old village and cemetery archaeological site in Newport Beach. She has passed, but her words are a valuable legacy.
Okay, was it in the middle? Is my father, Alfred Cruz Sr. He was an honored member of the Tribal Council. He was appointed as most likely descendant for the Acjachemen by the California Native American Heritage Commission and served for many years. He also served on the CCRPA board and spoke at numerous public hearings and meetings to try to preserve cultural resources threatened by development. Although he never raised his voice in anger, he was well known for his fierce commitment to preserving sacred sites and traditional cultural places. He has passed on, and I carry on his work. I learned from him. Okay, we'll present a brief overview of California Indians.
People began migrating into California more than 10,000 years ago.
Yet, our oral traditions say that we have always been here.
Maybe he's right, although it's very controversial. Researchers in San Diego County say that they have uncovered evidence that humans lived here 130,000 years ago. The evidence includes cut marks indicating butchering of a mastodon and possible stone tools. California had the densest pre-contact population north of Mexico. At the time of contact, the Native American population was estimated at 310,000.
By the end of the 19th century, there were less than 20,000 indigenous people. So think about it, from 310,000 to 20,000. Originally, the Acjachemen numbered more than 3,900 people. By 1834, the known Acjachemen population was down to 861 people.
This drastic population loss has been attributed to the fact that the indigenous people had no immunity against infectious diseases introduced by the Spanish. Diseases such as TB, smallpox, and influenza were not present in the New World because there were no domesticated animals other than the dog, and these diseases came from living in close contact with chicken, cattle, and pigs. Although the diseases reached epidemic proportions during the mission system, when the Indians were forced into crowded, airless barracks, it is believed that the diseases were introduced as early as the 1500s by Spanish sailors.
The first baptism of a California Indian was at the Acjachemen village of Soche on July 22nd, 1769. 3 gravely ill children were baptized by friars Juan Crespi and Francisco Gomez of the Portola expedition, which was the first Spanish exploration into Alta California by land. This was the first contact the Acjachemen had with Europeans. To commemorate the place of the event, the soldiers named the stream Cristianitos, means little Christians, and it still carries that name today.
Linguistically, the California Indians were very complex. There were 6 language phyla and 21 language families. To put this into perspective, Europe only has 3 language phyla: Indo-European, Turco-Mongolic, and Basque. As a result, when the Spanish explorers entered California, they found over 120 languages spoken, 70% of which were as mutually unintelligible as Chinese and English. As they marched up the coast, they were exposed to a new language every 10 miles. Linguists assigned the Acjachemen language to the Takic language family of the Uto-Aztecan language phylum. Except for the Colorado River tribes, agriculture was not practiced. Many California Indians, including the Acjachemen, traded with these river tribes and the pre-contact agriculturalists of Arizona and knew about agriculture, but their economy was based on hunting and gathering and not focused on a single species like corn. One explanation for this is that in California, almost all the rain falls during the winter months, and in corn agriculture requires summer rain or extensive irrigation. Irrigation would have required a lot of work because unlike the Nile and other fertile river valleys where agriculture developed in the Old World, the rivers here were unpredictable in their flood episodes and tended to change their course from time to time. For example, in the past, the Santa Ana River has had its outlet at Seal Beach and at Bolsa Chica and Huntington Beach. And today's flood episodes are mainly controlled by concrete flood control channels.
Pre-contact California had abundant resources. Hunting and gathering was more efficient. Acorn meal, known as we wish, is rich in protein and fats and provided 25% of the diet. When the first explorers came to California, They describe the land as a well-tended garden. Instead of agriculture, the California Indians practice a seasonal round of scheduling, trading, feasting, and gift-giving to maximize the seasonal availability of resources and even out shortages from one area to another, thereby creating a healthy balance. They also use controlled burning to burn away the understory from the oak trees and encourage the growth of grasses for seed and for the grazing animals they hunted. And they cultivated desirable edible plants and plants used in basketry, medicine, and ceremony. The Acjachemen have always primarily been a coastal peoples. They were proficient mariners. Shellfish, fish, and sea mammals were important dietary staples. Abalone fishhooks were used for line fishing. Other fish were speared by men diving into the kelp beds. Sea mammals were harpooned from small ocean craft, and archaeologists have documented a maritime village at the mouth of the San Mateo Creek that provided marine resources for the main village of Banhe.
Traditionally, the Acjachemen lived in the southern Orange County region of Southern California, with their core area lying in the San Juan Capistrano and San Mateo valleys. Their lands extended north along Pacific Ocean beaches and south to Las Pulgas Creek between San Clemente and Oceanside. They lived eastward into the Santa Ana Mountains and just over the crest line into Temescal Creek and around Lake Elsinore.
Okay, these boundaries suggested by anthropologists are not an accurate reflection of the territories that were shared by our Luceño neighbors to the south and our Gabrielino neighbors to the north. Of the 21 missions, the Acjachemen are the only tribe in California to have a description of their beliefs and customs written by a priest at the time when the people were still living in a traditional manner. The priest Jerónimo Buscana served at Mission San Juan Capistrano from 1814 to 1826. His book, Chinich Chinich, was first published in 1846. Despite the attempts of the mission fathers to keep the Acjachemen from practicing their traditional beliefs and culture, much of it was passed on from generation to generation in songs and stories. One of our enduring oral traditions is the founding of TThe, which is located in San Juan Capistrano. According to Buscana, Oyasan was the chief of a place called Sayat. This people prospered there, but as the population grew, the land could not provide sufficient seeds and game to support everyone. So with his oldest daughter, Corone, and young families who were willing to join him, he set out southwardly direction to find a good place for a new village. They found the beautiful San Juan Capistrano Valley and made camp next to a spring. Here, his people built their houses and established the village. Satisfied that the new village would thrive, Chief Oyasan returned to his country of Sayat and left his daughter Corone as chief. The village was called TThe, which means navel sticking out, because Corone had an outing navel. It was also said that the spring bubbled up like her navel. Thereafter, women leaders were called Corone.
Ceremonies included an annual mourning ceremony commemorating those who had died in the previous year, special commemorations on the anniversary of a chief or high-ranking leader, and boys and girls initiations. Initiation of youths into manhood involved tests of endurance and the ingestion of Jimson weed, also known as Datura is the scientific name. Here they were told to dream of animals to find their spirit helper. Training could last as long as a week as they were taught the history and moral and spiritual traditions of the Acjachemen people and their role as men. Girls' coming-of-age ceremony was an occasion for joy and happiness. The girls were placed in a warm pit lined with aromatic herbs and received instruction on proper female conduct by their elder female relatives. The ceremony also included a sand painting depicting certain cosmological events and supernatural beings that were explained so that the girls could understand their role and function in society and in creation.
The Acjachemen occupied over 20 villages with populations ranging from 50 to 125 people. Of these, Banhe, situated along the San Mateo Creek, was the largest with over 250 people. Each village was occupied by a different lineage and each was politically autonomous, but all were connected through a common language, clans, marriage network, and ceremonial exchange system. Just to let you know, today we're focusing a lot on Banhe, which is located in Camp Pendleton, and Petita, which is located in San Juan Capistrano, Maine. We're going to be mentioning other villages also, but we're focusing on basically those two.
Each village had its own chief and a council of lineage leaders, ceremonial specialists, and shamans that decided on community manners and advised the chief. The chief was a ceremonial leader of the group, a political leader, and economic administrator. He was assisted by several other men with important roles, such as the messenger who kept order at ceremonies, another man who led the communal rabbit hunt, and another who maintained the ritual calendar by observing the sun and moon. Hunters were expected to share their game with the community before eating it themselves, and chiefs collected surplus from the community to be used in fiestas and to be redistributed in times of need. Female leaders were called coronis. Some were village chiefs. The female clans were called ladybug clans, and their colors were red and yellow. Pictographs, rock paintings, and petroglyphs, rock carvings, may be found throughout Acjachemen territory. The rock paintings are characterized by an array of geometric forms with an occasional human or zoomorphic figure. Colors are mostly red, and sometimes black, white, and yellow pigments were used. Petrographs were made during boys and girls initiation ceremonies and by ritual specialists seeking to acquire power. Sand paintings were also used in the ceremonies, but they were not meant to be preserved. The predominant petroglyphs are cupules. These are small, rounded scoops on a boulder. The famous bell rock with cupules that you see in the picture on the right can be seen here at the Bowers Museum courtyard. Also, a large cave maze boulder was found in the middle of San Juan Creek Valley.
Body painting was used by both men and women in ceremonial dancing. Facial and upper body tattoos were a personal adornment for women. Feathers of woodpecker, hawk, eagle, and owl were used both symbolically and decoratively in many ritual objects used in ceremonies.
Basket weaving was a major form of artistic expression for women and demonstrated both the fineness of stitching and in the color and pattern of decorative elements. Baskets were made and used for a variety of functions, such as serving trays and bowls for serving food and storing objects, loose woven trays that were used for sifting, large baskets for storing grains, and baskets so tightly woven that they could hold water and were used for stone boiling. An example of that in the slide. Baskets were given as gifts, used for gathering, and as women's hats. Largest of all were the granaries, woven out of willow, mule fat, or artemisia branches, and used to store acorns.
So I encourage everybody that they have a basket collection here at Bowers to look at them because they're real, the detail on them. Then, you know, when you actually see it in front of you. Okay, physical sports such as foot races were played. The game shinny, where teams with clubs would knock the ball across the other team's goal, were enjoyed by both men and women. Gambling games were extremely popular. The on-hand game, you see right here the two pictures, which requires extraordinary mental concentration, starts at dusk and is played into the night, and it could be with it all night and into the next morning. It's still played by Acjachemen descendants today. In the past, Bjorn was played by men only, until recently was it women teams are starting.
Songs, music, and dance were for entertainment and ceremonies, and most songs had a spiritual aspect. Songs served as a means of passing down knowledge and oral traditions. The creation story and clan origins were preserved in songs sung at ceremonies. Some song cycles could take several nights to perform. Today, songs are performed at ceremonies and special events, and specially trained Acjachemen singers are called to perform at wakes and funerals that last all night.
Now we will talk about the storm. Under Spanish rule, the first mission on Acjachemen western coastal lands was established in 1776. On the east coast, this was the same time the United States declared independence from England. Acjachemen were forced to leave their villages and ways of life. In addition to infectious diseases, they suffered cultural shock and population decimation from changes in foods, type of work, crowded living quarters, and a loss of freedom. They were forbidden to practice their religion or tradition, and were punished for breaking the rules. Padre Antonio de la Concepcion, Ora of Mission San Miguel, enraged his contemporaries by a report to the Viceroy in Mexico that the Franciscan order was guilty of cruelty to the Indians. He was declared insane and removed from California. The response to cultural shock and mistreatment was loss of cultural identity, low birth rate, sickness, sporadic resistance, and one unsuccessful revolt. Despite this difficult history, many Acjachemen descendants are Catholic, and this is not meant to offend them. I myself am Catholic.
The Mexican Rancho period of 1821 to 1848 began with the Mexican Revolution from Spain. Under Mexican government, the Acjachemen were turned out of the mission, and with a few exceptions, lands promised to them were confiscated and given to Mexican petitioners. Many Acjachemen worked as vaqueros on the ranches, while the women sometimes worked at the haciendas, cleaning and cooking. In 1833, the small San Juan Capistrano mission community was formed as a Pueblo Libre, one of only 4 in California. Here, the remaining Acjachemen families could farm small plots of land as independent people, but under a government administrator. By 1841, less than 100 Acjachemen remained in town, and the Pueblo was disbanded. The Acjachemen families chose which small plots of land they wanted, and the remaining lands were open for settlers to claim. In a few years, most of the Acjachemen lost these lands as well.
The United States period beginning in 1848 was an escalation of chaotic times. The Spanish and Mexican influence was mainly confined to coastal areas. Now, settlers, gold miners, and loggers invaded the mountains and interior valleys, clogged up streams, cleared forests, drained marshes, and fenced the land. Wild game and plants needed by the Indians were destroyed or fenced off with cattle. In addition to starvation, the Indians were subjected to hatred and violence. Hence the quote, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian." In 1851, federal commissioners negotiated treaties with native tribes in California, which was then blocked by the governor of California for being too generous for reserving land for tribes. Instead, the greed for gold wealth led to a second option. Let's look at this option. Let's look at this option. This is from the first governor of the state of California. And I read his words that is a quote from him. That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. Must be expected. While we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. This is by the first governor of California, Governor Peter Burnett. California state government reimbursed citizen militia for their ammunition, guns, and horses to track down and kill Indians. These were the times that my great-grandparents were born into. Labor laws were passed where an Indian could be declared a vagrant and put in jail. His labor was then auctioned to townspeople, and he worked without pay to remedy for his fine. Indian women and children, if not killed, were often exploited.
Later, Indian children were sent to Indian boarding schools where they were separated from their parents and communities, wore uniforms, and their appearance altered to look more like Americans. They were not allowed to speak their native languages and were sent out to work as servants as a vocational training program. Many Acjachemen descendants went to the Sherman Indian School in Riverside.
Our ancestors suffer from negative images. They are considered to be technologically inferior and docile, passive, and helpless in the face of European domination. This is due to the religious fanaticism of 16th century Spain and the worldview at the time of European contact that Western civilization represented the pinnacle of cultural evolution. The 16th through 20th centuries are characterized by the drive to conquer, colonize, and exploit, and the measure of a people was according to technological advancement, wealth, and aggression. To me, this sounds familiar even now. The ancestors' technology was well suited for a sustainable interaction with their environment. In fact, they were successful for thousands of years and adapted to many of the environmental changes that we are facing today. As for non-aggression in the face of European domination, theirs was a tradition of peaceful interaction, with leaders trained in dispute resolution, including ritualized warfare to resolve differences. In addition, by the 1700s, the California Indian population was weakened and greatly reduced by introduced infectious diseases. When the gold rush of 1849 brought hundreds of thousands of new Anglo immigrants, they saw the Indians as a threat to their prosperity and security, and treated them as obstacles to be eliminated.
As a child growing up in Los Angeles, I learned that the California Indians lived in grass houses, didn't wear many clothes, were peaceful and timid, and dug roots from the ground with sticks. The gold rush immigrants called the California Indians Digger Indians. This was not an expression of admiration. The connotation was that they were backward and primitive and knew no better than to dig up roots for a living. They were not like the Indians of the Great Plains who attacked the pioneers as they immigrated to California.
The man in the war bonnet is Chief Clarence Lobel. He found it necessary to wear this Plains Indian regalia when he met with Washington, D.C. officials to pursue land claims for the Acjachemen people. Otherwise, they would not recognize him as a Native American. The children in the photos grew up on Rancho Santa Margarita, now Camp Pendleton, where their dad, Jose Olivares, was a foreman. The couple on the bottom right, the picture of Jose and Viviana Olivares in 1972 at their 50th wedding anniversary. The picture to the right is that of my grandparents, Raymond and Teresa Cruz. The picture in the middle is that of Jose Tomas Cruz, holding, was it my uncle, Richard Cruz? The picture to the left is that of my great-grandfather's first cousin, Captain Jose de la Garcia Cruz. He was known as a coup. It was taken in front of San Juan Capistrano Mission. He was known as, he was a Beyond Plain champion. He was, just to reiterate, he was a primo hermano with, my great-grandfather, right? And that's first cousins. Their grandparents were married in 1821 by the same priest, Jeronimo Buscana, who wrote the book Chinich Chinich. I mentioned them earlier before. The Acjachemen of today are business people, doctors, nurses, lawyers, educators, construction workers, etc. And many also are proud of and practice their native heritage. During the turbulent times of the past, a series of Acjachemen leaders helped the community to persevere. Since then, a variety of leaders have taken political, social, and educational roles for the betterment of the Acjachemen tribe to renew knowledge of language, traditional culture, and the preservation of pre-contact sites. Panhe is a place of the ancestors. It is situated on Camp Pendleton at the mouth of the San Mateo Creek. At the time of Euro-American contact in the late 1700s, Panhe was the largest and most populous of Acjachemen towns with a vast social network that reached the length and the breadth of the tribe's territory. Approximately half of the current Acjachemen community can trace themselves directly to a Panhe ancestor who is listed in the San Juan Capistrano Mission baptismal records.
In 1981, the archaeological site complex representing Panhe was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the San Mateo Archaeological District. The Acjachemen consider it to be a traditional cultural property and sacred site. Although the people were forced to abandon Panhe during mission times, and with the secularization of the mission, it became a part of Rancho Santa Margarita, and then Camp Pendleton, a military installation, it was never forgotten.
There are stories of sweat lodges and ceremonies during the 1930s, visitations for prayers and meditations in the 1940s, oath dances and reburial ceremonies during the 1980s. 1989, 1990, there was a reburial of important ancestors. The ashes of 2 Acjachemen tribal members and a natal cord were buried there in recent times. We still have an attachment to Panhe. It still exists. Since the early 2000s, the annual ancestor pilgrimage begins from Panhe at San Mateo Creek Campground. This Native American spring gathering and celebration of and protection preservation is open to the public and has been held at Panhe since 2008. So everybody's welcome. We have that annually.
It is estimated that 90% of Acjachemen ancestral sites have been destroyed to make way for development.
Sacred site of Panhe was threatened by the proposed Foothill South Toll Road, which was successfully stopped by San Alfred Coalition, which included the United Coalition to Protect Panhe. Currently, a portion of the Panhe Village complex is threatened by Camp Pendleton Sierra Training Program's uses site as an assembly area for heavy tracked vehicles. Archaeological data indicate that this portion of the Panhe Village complex was occupied by a clan with a maritime orientation. They were expert mariners who fished, hunted sea mammals, and traveled to the Channel Islands in balsa canoes for trade. The toll road was stopped, it's been stopped, but then we're still protecting the site.
Although the tribal community has asked the Camp Pendleton decision makers to find an alternative assembly area, this request was denied. Instead, as mitigation, the site was graded and covered with 6 inches of decomposed granite as protection against the tracked vehicles. However, when the tribes requested an inspection of the site, they were dismayed to find that although the official training program had not yet begun, heavy tracked vehicles had driven over the site, leaving deep ruts, displacing the decomposed granite and exposing the cultural deposit. It is obvious that this mitigation method is not working. At this time, we're providing documentation that the site is a traditional cultural property and sacred site in an effort to convince the decision makers to protect it. The TThe is a unique site that has cultural, spiritual, and scientific value. It is listed in the California Native American Heritage Commission's Register of Sacred Sites. It has been determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion A as a traditional cultural property. The traditional cultural values are documented through oral traditions regarding the founding of TThe that was passed from generation to generation, documented in the mission records and in the historic accounts of Father Geronimo Boscana in the 18th century. Based on this information, it is also eligible under Criterion B as a place associated with a person important in history, Coroni, the woman chief who founded the village. It is extremely rare that a named person can be associated with a pre-contact archaeological site. And finally, it's eligible under Criterion D for the potential to provide information important in history.
TThe is located in San Juan Capistrano. The elder in the photo is Luis Robles. Her ribbons on the fence contain offerings of tobacco. In spite of efforts of the Acjachemen tribal members, California Cultural Resources Preservation Alliance, and Sierra Club Sacred Sites Task Force, the site has been almost completely destroyed by the construction of sports facilities, including a gym, swimming pool, and playing field for a private Catholic high school, which ironically is named after Junipero Serra, the priest who established the missions that led to the destruction of the California Indians. Today, children play soccer on top of the ancestral cemetery. Similar circumstance what's happening at Bolsa Chica also. We tried to protect Bolsa Chica, but they still had a permit to build houses up on Bolsa Chica in the Mesa, Upper Mesa. And that was a cemetery also, is a cemetery.
16 years later, the San Juan Capistrano City Council has approved a plan to develop an Acjachemen Cultural Center within the Northwest Open Space in San Juan Capistrano. It will be called the Village of TThe and will be a gathering place for the Acjachemen descendants, a place where they can interpret and share their history and traditions through performances and demonstrations. It will be an educational resource for the community and for school children and tourists who visit the mission in the Los Rios Historic District.
What happened to California Indians is an allegory for inhumane treatment of fellow humans. There's a lesson to be learned about our shared California history. We're all Californians. Hopefully we are bringing you a deeper understanding not only of Native Americans, but all humanity. The California Indians were not primitive or backwards. They were misconceived, and that's to put it mildly, Nain? For our relationship to nature, inclusive of our belief systems.
The California Indians were the earliest people to live in California and thrived here for thousands of years. They adapted to many of the environmental changes that we are facing today, such as drought, climate change, and sea level rise. For example, tree ring data indicate that there was a drought in California that lasted 150 years, from AD 1100 to 1250.
Our worldview is that humans are a part of nature rather than apart from nature. Earth is a mother, giver of life. Some animals have superior aspects to humans. For example, the bear, the healing qualities of the bear, which is even on the California state flag. All animals and many inanimate features and objects have spirit. And as humans trying to make a living, our ancestors responded to the opportunities and constraints presented by the diverse environment of California with ingenuity and a sense of humor and love. Work together with the Acjachemen community to protect our environment. Our sacred sites and places of the ancestors. We need your help. Overcome old stereotypes about Native Americans. Avoid cultural appropriation. They joined the California Cultural Resources Preservation Alliance Incorporated, which I belong to, and I founded. A grassroots organization of Native American archaeologists, historians, environmentalists, and interested people working together to preserve archaeological sites and other cultural resources. Remember, we're all part of the human family. Hompalo. Thank you.